So this is the topic we are going to talk about today. However, I have to say it's going to be only the basics. Last year, I gave a semester of this topic at the Semmelweis University in Hungary, Budapest. So there is a lot to know, but many of them will not be surprising. I hope that the surprise will be on your behalf only, that how could I never thought about that? So let's put together what we know and in an organized way. And my email address is on the screen. Barbara has my email address as well, and feel free to contact me via email. That's the best way to do it, with any question or additional inquiries. So let's do it. This is what I'm going to talk about today. Let's first the relations of science and publications. Then we're going to put together a little system that what we know, and we'll see and look at the role of publication in the cycle of the scientific research. And then we start the practical part, begin writing basic process, principles, and of the elements which are most important. We are going to talk the title, abstract, and the closing today. People usually remember the beginning of things and they remember the end of things. What's in between is something that may not leave that deep of the impression. But we will talk about the typical mistakes to avoid in content and style, editorial process, and the 5 rules of rejection, a little bit of what the editor does, and editorial services that can help you and how to find one. First, the landscape. According to the Science and Technology Management Report, there are about more than 10,000 journal publishers, which about 5,000 are included in the Scopus database. The main English language associations, it's less, but they probably 650, so many small publishers. But about 50% of the journal output is English language. And roughly about 33,000 peer-reviewed scientific English journals producing 3 million articles a year. So as you see, it's very easy to get lost in that complicated field, and due to the real growth in research and development, about 2 million people are repeat authors. They publish repeatedly, and 8 or 9 million, or maybe might be around 10 million today, the total number of researchers, many of them students. So what is science? Science is a practical activity encompassing systematic study, a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge, and itself the organized body of knowledge. If you look at it again, I intentionally highlighted systematic, and systematically. So there is a reason for that, because everything that is outside of this body of knowledge is not real available. So that shows that the scientific literature itself is not science. It's just a more or less organized body of knowledge and information. Data is not information. That's very important to know. You can show your data to anybody and he or she will look at it as, so what? It is, you have to transform it into information, and I will show you. There are many reasons to write a manuscript. For students to be allowed to graduate, there are schools that a PhD student has to write at least publish 3 papers in various journals to satisfy career requirements, to get tenure later, to please your supervisor. And the basic function is to share scientific information and knowledge. It's just one of them. Originally, that was the main goal, but now it's so many others. Your grant proposal require publications. If faculty are on the line, they know what I'm talking about. To generate citations, so when you are young faculty, there's a measure of your abilities, research performance, and so on. Articles or presentations have many things in common and have a few basic important features that are different. Common feature is that both describe a topic to an audience with the goal to inform and convince others. I'd like to point out this is not about to tell what I'm doing, and it's about the audience. Both of them, actually, articles and presentations, about the audience. A scientific presentation, we are not going to detail it today. This is usually a graphic dominated and a text aided, and could be for any audience. You never exactly know who is your audience, especially in scientific meetings. You go in the room, and which is usually half full. Some people stay there, other people are coming in, and you have no idea who exactly is there. But what is important, it makes a presentation makes a one-time impression to the audience, and this one-time impression is about you. Most of the time, it's not about only the topic; it is primarily you. And I have to again emphasize another thing, that there's an optimal amount of new information. Too much information is bad, and too little is not valuable. So it also requires some additional training and knowledge. And you can lose your audience only once during your presentation. A scientific article is also the goal of it is informing and convincing others, but it's text dominated, and the graphic aids it. Typically for expert audience and peers, people who are not experts, they're not going to read, or not interested, they're not going to read your manuscript or your paper. Members of the audience can read the article repeatedly, so it could be extensive and highly technical, as opposed to a scientific presentation, which I would seriously counter-advise to get too technical. Again, you lose your audience only once. So let's organize a little bit what we already know. Why don't we remember everything? It would be so great, isn't it? There's some people have more memories. There are some people remember details. Other people remember relations. But during our life, everyday life, we are constantly bombarded by impulses, light, sound, and so on, and so-called accidental observations. And hearsay, you are taking the bus, you are taking the tram, you are taking the metro, you hear people talking, but you don't remember most of it, which is because they are filtered and interpreted by our brain based on personal experience and our acquired knowledge. It's a typical and well-known fact that eyewitnesses have different they remember differently of the same events. So why? Let me show you that human brain is really powerful. So you see what I see? Are these horizontal lines parallel, or do they slope? I assure you these are parallel lines, but your brain, through your eyes, interprets it differently. So it's not enough to look, if you have to measure. What we see is the brain interpretation, and everybody's brain separately decides whether it is important for you or it is unimportant for you. That kind of information. The more our data information, we more better understand it and more connected, that we know that generates more knowledge. So this is a simple system we all know. So you base science based on data. You have to observe with intent and measure with intent. And the more connected it becomes, the better we understand. So first you generate data, and we need to understand the relations between the data. Then we allow information. If we understand how these data relate to each other, we have a piece of information. If we understand the patterns between the different kind of information that are coming from different directions, we have certain knowledge. And if we understand the principles, we let your skills, applicable knowledge, or things that you can do, which I call wisdom. And wisdom allows us to take intelligent action. We all throughout our life, we always take actions every day, and most of them are not intelligent. You don't think about it. It's we are the creatures of habit. It's learned behavior and habitual actions. So, if someone is a scientist or wants to becoming a scientist, he has to take intelligent actions. What it allows us to simplify complexity. Could it be more simple? I don't think so. And how much time did it take to arrive to this? And how much rejections did it take to arrive to this very simple expression? The take-home message is that simplifying complexity makes quantitative predictions possible. Again, simplifying complexity makes quantitative predictions possible. I hope that everybody already had that moment, that aha moment, and suddenly you study, and you suddenly, oh, it's so simple. Oh, I understand it. Now that's when you have a piece of knowledge, that's when you have a certain. So it doesn't mean that you can apply it immediately, but that is possible. And again, the take-home message number 2 is the essence is always simple. Only the details are complicated. So when you are looking at the details, the more you dig into the details, the more complicated it gets. Of course, because it contains very much more and very many components. So the role of the publication is to provide knowledge and information based on data to better understand the world. There are always gaps in our wisdom. So we start out with the hypothesis, which essentially means that I think it works this way. We plan and perform experiments to gather data, and generally we say, yeah, well, I have some good data, some bad data. No, there are no such things. Bad data are that you cannot repeat, you cannot reproduce. Good data is everything. Understanding your data is understanding relations. See, it's a very different story. First step is to gathering data and leave the understanding. Do not discard data just like because you don't like it. So to collect reproducible data, and then when you start thinking about your paper, your manuscript, there's an introduction part which describes what is known in there. There is an experimental plan. The next step, you choose materials, you choose methods, conditions, how to prove or disprove your hypothesis. Then you list the results, to put it together, understand the relations between your data, and you discuss it when this is the information part, and you draw conclusions. Once you understand the patterns, you draw conclusions to provide the piece of knowledge. And this is now at a much higher level than just the data. So the research articles typically in this area. So data, information, and piece of knowledge. Reviews are not a collection of literary data from all kinds of libraries and this guy wrote this, that guy wrote that. It's not a listing. It's synthesizing the knowledge based on the information and knowledge, understanding patterns to provide an understanding principles. This is a typical problem of many reviews, that they just simply list, you have to evaluate that knowledge, because then our knowledge is never totally coherent. We have pieces of the puzzle, and we have to put that together to better connect it and better understand the world around us. And this process is repeated over and over for every publication, because there is very rarely you find and you hit a completely, totally original idea or original measurement. So there is somewhere publication 0, but these new knowledge is built on publication 1, 2, 3, and now we know why, because these are the pieces of information and leading to different knowledge that has to be synthesized. I would underline that reproducible new information. Unfortunately, later years, the squeezing of authors to publish led to a phenomenon what we call in the editorial and the publishing industry salami slicing. So publish minimally publishable information so it can come up with more papers, more articles, more published articles. That is not really good. And that's a very complex problem. We're not going to go into it. I just simply saying that this exists. The cycle of scientific research requires both knowledge and skills. Skills, what you acquire during your, most of the time during your, sometimes during your university years, and most of the time during the first 20 years of your career. How this works, this cycle. So you have a plan, do the experiment. To better understand these principles, we create a hypothesis and plan and run experiments to get the data. Then the next round, analyze the data to understand relations, to create information, identify patterns to form new knowledge, and then share our information and knowledge with others to contribute to the common knowledge. And hopefully we are getting wiser and wiser, acquiring more and more wisdom during these years. Just a side comment that basic research is never finished. It just runs out of money and time. Nobody knows everything, and we will not understand and know everything. But it is our task as scientists to increase the amount of knowledge and individual wisdom and understand more and more. So let's start writing your manuscript. That is sharing your data, information, knowledge in order to inform and convince others. Of course, in the written articles, so publishing, you have to convince the editors first. There is a filter to make sure that the information is useful. And information and knowledge, the content of your paper is useful, and it is good enough to change others' mind. Now, what do? You wish to publish your paper in a prestigious journal, of course, and get many citations, and prefer to not spend a lot of time writing. Send it to the right journal, good reviews, get accepted quickly, and publish it in a short time. However, this is not always up to you. More prestigious journals have a very long waiting list, which may might make it impossible to quickly get out the communication quickly with something new finding. You don't want to wait a half a year to get there. To achieve these goals, you need readers. Simple, isn't it? So what is a scientific manuscript? It is a simple, logical, and systematic description of complicated things. Again, a simple, logical, and systematic description of complicated things. and not a complicated, illogical, and sophisticated description of simple things. I've seen so many of that. And it goes back to content and style, and a high-flying style is not going to raise the level of your article. Actually, it's going to push it down. The writing process: content, language, and format. What's the best way to get it? Like, okay, every journal has descriptions that your article, your manuscript should contain this, that, and this order, and that order. These are just, but all of them is the same. The best way is, according to my practice, that you imagine you're going to tell a story to other people about your trip to an interesting place when you haven't been before. So a trip to Greenland, a trip to Antarctica, or whatever you want to go, Oceania, or it's a good idea to take photos, the collect data, that is, then put together a photo album first and find the best way to show them. It may not be in the order you took those photos. So tell me, let's get together and tell me, why did you go there? So you describe your motivation and hypothesis. Who were there before? What did they see? How did they get there? That's basically your introduction. You give a background, what is known. How did you get there? What kind of methods and materials used? What happened when you got there? Observations and measurements. What do you think all about this? What do you want to tell me about this? What is your advice? Then finally, or last but one, what is your advice for us and for the future to draw conclusions? Don't forget to thank those who made your trip possible. That goes into the acknowledgement. So practically, there are 5 steps of writing a manuscript. Number 1, identify a topic. The research topic, that is usually you identify it or your supervisor identifies it, but the point is, what is your story? You usually set out having a hypothesis to prove or disprove that hypothesis. The story is not what is happening during that day. It's not the register of what did you do in the lab. So the best way to start writing a manuscript, just write down everything as you have, as it comes. Data, relations, create pieces of information, and try to identify what is the new knowledge. First, you don't have to focus on the content, and you don't have to focus on the style. Just keep writing, just do it. Then, in the second round, the second step, simplify your language and check for grammar. Don't be perfectionist in the first draft. Make sure that you have a story. Make sure that you are saying what you intended to say. This is another typical one thing. It's very typical problem that you know what you are trying to say, but you're not saying that. It's very useful, especially when you work with groups, that someone with similar background of you or a co-author have it read and then go through together. That this is exactly what you are intended to say. Of course, you need to agree or to the data and the explanations. So select a target journal, download and read the author information. These are different from every journal. So it is not necessary to read the whole 30 pages, but it is 30 pages or 16 pages or whatever, definitely long, because it contains everything what you might need. Just skim it through and mark it up what you need. Download the templates. Many journals have templates, and transfer your content into the required format. Don't care about limitations at this point yet, not yet. That comes in the left. I'll apply style and limitations, and then number 5, define your style. Defining a style, again, would require a very thorough and deep knowledge of the language you are using, and whoever wasn't born in an English-speaking country have different issues. Usually, then during the semester or the course, we talk about that. And I give you a few examples later. But let's just stay for the refine your style. So making sure. So the process itself. Step 1 is definitely start writing. Don't delay. Don't postpone that. Oh, I'm gonna do it tomorrow. No, start it today. In the first step, decide what is your goal by telling the story. Not just tell a story. Not every story is interesting, but every scientific information and correct knowledge is important. We don't know at the moment we publish it how important is that, what's the significance. We're trying to figure it out, but I usually don't believe in that. Of course it's important, it's my research. So anyway, start writing as it comes, just do it, describe methods, usually they come from other, collect and organize data. Compose tables, create graphs. There are ways to focus on whether you want to compare things, you want to contrast things, whether you have many numbers or trends you want to show. And write down a brief account for the findings. These are the separate pieces of information. And organize that, arrange them, figure out how those can be explained. Trying to look for patterns, supporting, contradicting, comparing to, and so are these final things they look at it in the next round. That are they consistent with your hypothesis? Is it prove it or disprove it? Are your conclusions supported by your data? Now the step 2, create your content. So that the step 1 was just collect whatever you have. Decide on the journal and the type of your future paper. Is it a short paper? Is it a communication? Is it a research paper? Is it a review? Is it at certain areas? Definitely read the author instructions. As I read, and it's very important to download the templates, as I mentioned before. Apply the required format and reorganize your manuscript. Don't care about, already mentioned, don't care about the limitations. It can be just only 2 pages. For example, Jack's communication cannot be more than 2 pages, and so on. To compose the first version of introduction. Again, introduction is what is known. Not everything, the relevant information. Reorganize your data, discuss your data, explain them, and look at that. Is there any new knowledge? What is it? Because this is the point of the whole thing. Describe, and then people often forget, describe how this new knowledge may be useful for others. Remember, you will read your manuscripts at least 6 to 10 times minimum. The person who is reading it reads once, if at all. So make it easier for the reader to acknowledge, to accept the new knowledge and understand how can he or she use it. And there are a few basic principles. Number 1, never forget that articles are written for others and not for yourself. Again, it's not a lab notebook. It is a story. Have a good story. Keep it simple to read, easy to understand, plus make it good looking. Your reader knows only as much as you have taught him or her. Again, often committed mistake. Oh, it everybody knows. You think that everybody knows what you do. No. You are the one person or the few people who are writing the same manuscript, who knows the most about the topic, because you were present at the doing the experiments. You know things that it is not written down. Your reader knows only as much as you have told. Always explain how this is useful for others. They are not going to think about it on the first reading. Do you think about it? How it could be useful for you? Someone, and then the fifth one, someone who is trying to reproduce your work is a potential collaborator. And again, the more we are connected, the better we get. So provide all necessary experimental details. At least one example, even in the method, a commonly used method, and as an describe it in that as an example, this and that was done with that way and arrived at these numbers. And most importantly, in my opinion, the paper should move the field forward. There is a very easy way to remember these principles, and how can someone get readers. Think about, what do people buy? People buy what they need. People buy what they find interesting, what looks good, but even maybe beautiful, what is easy to get. Of course, there are everybody's computers today full of PDF papers downloaded belonging to that category. Oh, that is interesting, I'm going to read it one day. Well, from my own experience, what is interesting is not necessarily useful, but anyway, what they need, what they find interesting. So what do you read? What is useful for you? What you find interesting? What is good looking, which is project thoroughness and attention to details? What is simple to read and easy to understand? Do you read a complicated, hard to understand, unclear paper carefully? I don't think so. So the way need to remember, the way you read papers of others is exactly the way others read your paper. What do they look at first? They look at first at the title, and they decide, continue reading, yes or no. Then some people look at figures, most people look at the abstracts and decide, continue with downloading the paper, yes or no. Then they look at figures, conclusions, and only after that they look at the body of the paper, and they still decide, continue to the supporting material, yes or no. And can I reproduce the results? My point is, it's like a triangle pointing downwards. The number of those who continue always decreases. Most people are going to read your title. A few people are going to read your abstract. Some people look at the body of paper, and the real interested one look at the supporting material. That's why I said, describe everything in details in the supporting material. You may have local, national or international collaborators, which is very, very useful. So the title. Title is the first thing that the reader will see, and this will, as I said, determine whether they read further. And very important, it also sets expectations. So if your title is not right and they expect something else, don't be surprised if they get different things and they will be disappointed. It's like a movie, going to the movies, asking your friend, do you know a good movie? Or you just tell you, oh, we've been here and there, it was great. You go there to expect a great movie based on the title, and it could be very shady and unentertaining. And maybe not because you are not interested in it. You wouldn't take advantage of 2 hours of great entertainment. So let's get back to the profession. Title needs to encapsulate the subject in a few words. Try to make it interesting and inclusive. But I will give you a few examples. What do I mean? Start by defining the topic, your story. and convert it to the title as a last step. I always write my title as a very last step to capture the attention, because that is, remember that this triangle pointing downwards? If someone doesn't read your title, you have zero chance to go and read your paper. A few of the good titles, examples. Nanomedicine and Nanotoxicology, two sides of the same coin. It names the topic, but also it brings in the same coin. Now it's money is good. You understand what I'm saying? Now it's a different thing. TNF alpha in cancer treatment, molecular insight, anti-tumor effects, and clinical utility. It's a great title. Probably clinicians will read it right away. But it's also a title that the synthesis of benzodiazepine derivatives attached in PAM animals and the anti-cancer activity, but it's just for a smaller audience. So it also depends on your topic, what kind of audience you are aiming that title. Let's look into another aspect. What is the difference between quantum dot nanoparticles for optimization of breast cancer diagnostic and therapy in a clinical setting? Who is an attractive title for? Probably someone with the quantum dot nanoparticles. So the more important thing is in the front, and additional is additional follows. Optimization of breast cancer diagnostics and therapy by quantum dots in a clinical setting. Who will read it primarily? Who is interesting for this title? Whoever works in breast cancer diagnostics and therapy. It could be a researcher, could be a clinician. Clinical optimization of breast cancer is definitely for clinicians, aimed at clinicians. Quantum dot nanoparticles for optimization of breast cancer, no clinical setting. See, this is primarily for biologists, cancer biology people. A few other bad titles. Do endothelial cells dream? And these are all real titles. Dream of eclectic shape. Cells don't dream. Come on. Heat-assisted amplification of plasmonic circle dichroism in dynamic gold nanorod oligomer surfactant bilayer mediated carotid transfer. And my reaction is to what? I'm not sure what is this about. I'm not gonna read it. Take engineering design of functional molybdenum sulfide nanosheets for image-guided targeting therapy of drug-resistant MCF7 cancer. I bet that most of the MDs stop reading after the first row. This is because it emphasizes engineering, it emphasizes a molybdenum sulfide nanosheet, which is already at least 3 or 4 unknown word, or not unused word for MD. Let's talk about briefly about the abstract. The abstract gives the reader a preview what is to come. Abstracts are published separately. What you need to know. Abstract is published separately bibliographical sources, so it's supposed to be a standalone piece. Don't refer, don't quote. They allow other scientists to decide which articles they want to read in depth. Remember the triangle? The abstract should be less technical than the article. You don't want to scare away your potential audience. It should be one paragraph, one continuous paragraph, not too long. It summarizes the purpose, methods, results, conclusions. With practical sense, you start by writing a summary that includes, and then cut it down and leave out everything that is not that important for the point, then make it easy to read. And as I've said, it is a standalone, citations, footnotes, only use very trivial abbreviations like MRI, NMR, and so on. Don't introduce your own abbreviations there. Remember, it is published separately. There is no one no way to go and look it up. What did you mean? Now, the other is important for end is how do you end your story? The closing. Acknowledge those who helped with the experiments and made important contributions. This is different from the co-authorship and authorship. My principle is what I'm using is always been, was it possible to get this manuscript, get this research done without the person, without that contribution? If the answer is no, that's a co-author. If the answer is yes, helped typing the manuscript or made other contributions, then then the answer is no. That's belongs to the acknowledgement. Always thank for funding. Databases now, pardon me. Databases now track this funding, and funding officers, project officers, they need to show that they spent the money wisely. So these acknowledgements, they go back to the agency, and it makes you a better, give you a better chance to get continued funding. References. Whenever you refer to previously published work, you must acknowledge the source. Any information as not common knowledge should be recognized with a citation. The citation helps you. It helps all those others you are citing. The style is defined by the specific journal. Add supplementary material. Precision nanomedicine has unlimited supplementary material. These are PDFs that, in one word, provide details to reproduce your experiment and your data. Again, that helps you primarily, not only the other person. Now the next big area, edit your paper. You're just done with the first version, the second draft, that you are now in the major part, which is rewriting. One of the friends said that I am writing a page every day. Unfortunately, this is the same page. So what should you pay attention to? Write accurately. Scientific writing must be accurate. Again, we remember much better what we intended to say than exactly what we have said. Although writing instructions may not use the same thought twice, it's okay for scientific writing to get a little bit dull. It must be, because it must be accurate. Use thesaurus to find the best word, but do not use words you don't know, because it's a very tricky area. Make sure what you mean. Here is a general example that I've seen so many times. So it is saying the rats were injected with the drug, or mice were injected with the drug. That is, for a English speaker, sounds like a syringe was filled with the drug and the ground up rats, and both were injected together somewhere, because the function of with also means together. It's unclear. So this sentence for an English speaker sounds very funny. Check your grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Use a spell checker. There is now a very good program that's called Grammarly, which has a free version. I have no interest in recommending it, but I use it myself as a professional version, because English is not my first language. Actually, it's my third language. First is Hungarian, and second, because of history, it's Russian. So use a spell checker, but be aware that don't catch all mistakes. They just look at the form of the word. So when they consider an animal as a whole, the whole is a meaningful word, but the sentence is funny. A spell checker may not recognize scientific terms. You have to teach it. Same applies to commas. Don't use unnecessary commas. Proofread, or better, have someone else proofread to see if you left any words out. Use the thesaurus as I recommended it, and do not use words if you're not sure about their meaning. Typical mistakes in content of a manuscript, of course. To talk about what you have done instead of telling a story. You need to tell a story. Nobody's interested in what you have done in the lab. You tell everything you have done. Same mistake. No justification. So readers don't know why have you selected to use or elected to use a particular method. Too much is in one figure. That's an often committed mistake when the number of figures is limited, and then authors are trying to scrape everything into all graphs into one figure. The opposite, incomplete figures, that lack of experimental information. Observation is not information, as I've said. Data is not information. You have to show the correlation between them. No conclusions, sometimes it's just left out. Only data on the slide and no other information. And what I really don't like personally, too much sales talk and specifics and talking about the greatness of the importance and significance of the research instead of talking about the research. Typical mistakes in style. Avoid using terms that don't carry information. That we call it blah blah blah. Avoid terms that project uncertainty or unjust generalization. Grandiose statements. So a few examples. The nanoparticle. First of all, a particle means a solid piece of material with a permanent shape. Unfortunately, this is one of the most often commented. Anything that bounces is not a particle. My cell is not a particle. The second, successfully, significantly, obviously, about, some, approximately. Be specific. Give it that 1%, 1.3%. As we've seen on figure 2, it's not about 1. It is either 1 and 1 plus minus 1.00 plus minus 0.2. This is against science. Or other typical things. Cure cancer. Cancer is a collective name, and heterogeneous and illnesses that are continually changing. Blurring the border, clinical use and research topics that XYZ have acquired great clinical significance. What? After then, the next important things. In vitro experiments to show targeting. Targeting cells or cell receptors, more precisely, can only be targeted in vivo. In vitro is binding. Emphasizing only the positive aspects. So nothing is perfect. Give me the limitations of your method. Neglecting system characteristics that we often, especially earlier articles, that gold nanoparticles. There is so many other things in the blood. Lousy when you inject gold nanoparticles. And also an often committed mistake, lousy characterization of components and materials used, and very thorough biologic experiments of unknown materials. It's just meaningless. So let's look into the editorial finally. The editorial process, checking the format, the content, language, and quality. When the paper arrives at the office, a few things happen. The managing editor who operates the system reviews the manuscript for formal requirements. If it doesn't fit formal requirements or original requirements, that it will be sent back right away. EIC, the editor-in-chief, evaluates the merit and rejects or considers the manuscript. It may be assigned an associate editor, again, that's usually handling editors who are within the same expertise that the manuscript is in, or finds an even peer reviewers to have additional input. Critics are received, evaluated, then a first decision made, and evaluation shared, and this cycle repeats itself, usually at least once, twice. The maximum I ever seen is 3 times. If after 3 cycles, authors are unable to convince the editor and the reviewers, then which are looking for how it fits your manuscript's information, knowledge, how it fits to the known area and conclusions. That usually does not continue after the 3rd round. Decision is finalized and the paper goes to publishing. Then we don't talk about publishing. So staff does the formal check. Did it follow the instructions of the journal? Formatting correct. It contains the required subtitles, abstract introductions. These are specific introductions that usually describe in the journal. And it figures as sufficient quality. Every document being uploaded, and there is no manuscript return. So the editor-in-chief checks the appropriateness. Is it relevant to the scope? Many journals doesn't have scope anymore, like scientific papers, science. What kind of scope it has? Science. Is the topic original, novel, especially in those cases when you give away the rights to the article? Is this significant? Does the study have merit, good enough quality? So this is how I see your manuscript through the cross-check program of the ITED. The color coding shows where does it come from. That in the top, it says 10,558 words, 3,000 images, 130 sources. This is the internal code. Bibliography excluded, quotes excluded. So that's why it's important to quote if you take something from another paper. And this is particularly, actually this is a review, so 58% similarity is not horrible. A review is not supposed to be totally new, totally original. And the color coding tells which article, which source it came from. So that's 4% of, 4% of here, the other one for the Meyerson article, and so on, so on, so on. So what is to remember? Don't copy sentences or paragraphs without referring to it or quote it. Quotation mark. Don't pass the works of others as your own. Especially when I've seen it many times. It is unintentional, but when a student, a PhD student or postdoc writes the paper, he fails to put in the quotation mark and the source. And then it goes through, and when the professor or supervisor reads it, he doesn't know. And it goes out, then someone writes a paper to the editor. Oh, this is my paper. How come they are talking about it? This is directly taken from my part. So always acknowledge citation sources. These are very detailed instructions. So that and may end up with plagiarism, which is the #1 rule of rejection without review. Second is out of scope. That usually comes with a reference that you don't want to turn people completely around, or that recommends something else. Too preliminary. Again, observations is not knowledge. You need to be data. So example, single dose studies, very few animals, in vitro assays, single dose, no proper controls, no healthy cells as control. It also often happens. Lack of novelty. It depends what is the purpose, what's the scope of the journal, but usually it is a negative, unless it is specifically the paper is about reproducibility, because we actually, at Precision Nanomedicine, accept reproducibility papers. It's very important. Lack of quantitative data, specifics, correct models, and again, too much sales start. Finally, you want to remember that, especially if it's a first paper, you never have a second chance to make a first impression. It is something to remember. When editors and reviewers first read your manuscript, they already make up their mind unintentionally before looking at your actual results. If it's not thorough, if it doesn't look good, if there are spelling mistakes, will make the editor and reviewer think that the same is true for the experiments. So read it and have it read one more time, because usually doing the experiments take way more time and expense than writing a paper. There are many editorial services to help authors, many of them just mostly themselves trying to make money from other people, lack of skills. How to spot a phony editorial service? If you find spelling and grammatical errors on the web page, that's a no-no. You don't know who you would be working with. You cannot cannot verify the credentials. Then the service is located in a country which is not formed on scientific achievements, and without naming any countries, you know what I mean. Once you find out the title and you go to www.whois.com, you can actually find the computer located in which country and maybe even in which town. So you can look it up from there. The business doesn't have a verifiable location and a text ID number. Legal businesses have text ID number and a postal address. You are asked only web forms to communicate. Again, this is usually used to cover up the location. Price is too high or too low. You know, too high is we want to make a lot of money. Too low is that what you're gonna get? Maybe another student will read your manuscript. And I've even seen that they ask you to have your manuscript reviewed by a native English speaker. Please. One example that's actually run by us, it's manuscriptclinic.us. This is somehow as the first page look, it less time wasted. And the only thing I want to emphasize on this page, we don't do proofreading. Proofreading alone will not help you. If the editor or whoever works with you does not understand the underlying science, in the best case scenario, you are still saying incorrect thing in perfect English. That's not really helpful. For more, you can anytime contact me at office@mceditors.com if you want to learn more about it. For the journal, as I said, Barbara has my contact information.